He paid a stranger's rent for 6 months on moving day. The truth destroyed him. Before we begin, I'd love to know something. Where in the world are you listening from? Tell me in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you enjoy stories like this, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And tell me in the comments what you think about this story when it's over. I really love reading your thoughts. The first envelope wasn't meant to change anything. Ethan Moore told himself that repeatedly, especially later, when memory became a weapon and every small choice demanded an explanation. At the time, it felt like nothing. A simple decision on an ordinary Tuesday. Ethan had just turned 38, old enough to know better, young enough to still believe that doing the right thing quietly mattered more than doing it loudly. He lived alone in a clean, modest apartment in a building that smelled faintly of detergent and old paint. Nothing fancy, nothing broken. The kind of place you lived when your life was mostly in order, but you didn't need to prove it to anyone. That morning, he noticed the eviction notice taped crookedly to the door across the hall. Final warning. Balance due. $1,200. The paper curled slightly at the corners, like it had already given up hope of being taken seriously. Ethan paused longer than he should have. He didn't know the tenant's name. He had seen the man only a handful of times, quiet, thin, always moving as if trying not to take up space. Late 40s, maybe early 50s. Eyes down, shoulders heavy with something invisible. They had never spoken. That was important. Ethan wasn't the type who needed gratitude. He wasn't trying to be a savior. He just remembered something. His father, years ago, standing in their kitchen with bills spread across the table, running numbers that never worked, the way silence filled the room when money became a language no one wanted to speak. Ethan reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and checked his balance. He could afford it. That was the part that made the choice feel harmless. That night, Ethan withdrew cash, slid it into a plain white envelope, and wrote only 3 words on the front. Rent, this month. No name, no signature. He slipped it under the stranger's door. Then he went back to his apartment and slept better than he had in weeks. The next month, he did it again. Not because anyone asked. Because the eviction notice never came back. Because sometimes kindness, when unanswered, grows roots. By the 3rd month, Ethan had developed a routine. Withdraw cash on the 28th, fold it carefully, slip it under the door before dawn. 6 months passed that way. 6 envelopes, 6 silent transactions, 6 opportunities to stop. He never knocked, never waited for thanks, never told anyone. The stranger never left a note. That should have been a warning. But Ethan mistook silence for dignity. Life moved forward around the ritual. Ethan worked long hours as a project manager for a mid-size construction firm. He wasn't rich. He wasn't struggling. He existed in that narrow space where generosity felt possible, but not reckless. Friends asked why he never upgraded his apartment. Saving, he said. Which was true, just not in the way they imagined. Sometimes, late at night, he wondered who the man across the hall really was. What had happened to him? Why he never seemed to have visitors? Why he always carried a single duffel bag, even when he was home? But Ethan never asked. He told himself it wasn't his place. That was the lie that made everything easier. The 7th month never came. Instead, Ethan noticed boxes. They appeared quietly, stacked against the wall near the stranger's door. Old cardboard, duct tape peeling at the seams, everything labeled in neat, careful handwriting. Books, clothes, tools. That surprised him. Ethan stood in the hallway, longer than necessary, staring. Moving day. Something twisted in his stomach. He knocked for the first time. No answer. He knocked again. Footsteps approached slowly. The door opened just enough for one eye to appear. "Yes?" the man asked, voice hoarse. Up close, he looked older than Ethan thought. Lines etched deep around his mouth. Eyes tired in a way sleep never fixed. "I live across the hall," Ethan said, suddenly unsure of everything. I saw the boxes." The man nodded. "I'm leaving." "Oh, Ethan replied. Silence filled the space between them. Then the man spoke again, quieter. You're the one who paid my rent. Ethan froze. You don't need to deny it, the man said gently. I knew from the first month. Ethan swallowed. Why didn't you say anything? The man's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Because if I heard your voice, I might not have survived it. The sentence landed heavier than Ethan expected. I'm sorry, Ethan said, automatically. The man shook his head. Don't be. You gave me time. Time. The word echoed. Ethan glanced at the boxes again. Where are you going? The man hesitated. Then he opened the door wider. Inside, the apartment was almost empty, except for one thing, a small framed photograph sitting alone on the floor. Ethan's breath caught, because the man in the photo was him. Ethan stared at the photograph as if it might rearrange itself into something less impossible. It didn't. The man standing beside a younger version of himself, both smiling awkwardly at the camera, was unmistakably him. Same crooked grin, same scar above the left eyebrow from a childhood bike accident. Same blue jacket he had owned in his early 20s and later donated without a second thought. His knees weakened. That's me, Ethan whispered. The stranger nodded slowly, as if bracing himself for impact. Yes. How do you? Ethan stopped, unable to finish the question. The man opened the door fully and stepped aside. You should sit. Ethan stepped inside, heart pounding. The apartment felt hollow, stripped of anything personal. No furniture, no decorations, just echoes and dust, and that photograph resting on the floor like evidence. The stranger picked it up carefully. My name is Daniel, he said. And before today, I didn't think I'd ever say that to you out loud. Ethan sank onto the floor, back against the wall. This isn't funny. Daniel winced. I know. How do you have that picture? Ethan demanded. That was taken in college. I don't even know where the original went. Daniel sat across from him, legs crossed stiffly. I took it. Ethan laughed once sharp, disbelieving. You're saying you knew me back then? I knew you, Daniel replied. Very well. Ethan's mind raced. He searched memory desperately, flipping through years like a frantic archivist. I would remember you, he said. I remember everyone. Daniel's gaze softened, and that made everything worse. No, Daniel said quietly. You remember who you were allowed to remember. Silence thickened. What does that mean? Ethan asked. Daniel inhaled slowly, as if pulling himself together. 16 years ago, you worked part-time at a community outreach center downtown. You helped tutor kids, organized food drives. You weren't always a project manager chasing deadlines. Ethan's breath hitched. I quit, Ethan said slowly. Funding dried up. Daniel nodded. You quit the day after my sister died. The words struck like a blow. You had a sister? Ethan asked. Daniel smiled faintly. Her name was Claire. Something stirred faint, buried. She volunteered there too, Daniel continued. She talked about you constantly, said you listened, said you made people feel like they mattered. Ethan's chest tightened. I don't remember. I know, Daniel said. You left before the hospital called. Ethan's mouth went dry. Hospital? Daniel looked at the wall, eyes unfocused. Claire got sick. No insurance. She waited too long. By the time they admitted her, it was already too late. Ethan shook his head. I didn't know. That sentence, Daniel said softly, has haunted me for years. The air felt thin. Why are you here? Ethan asked. Why live across the hall? Why let me pay my rent? Daniel finished. Yes. Daniel's jaw tightened. Because I wanted to know if the man you became still existed somewhere inside you. Ethan stared at him. That's not fair. Daniel nodded. Neither was losing her. Ethan stood abruptly, pacing the small space. You moved in here on purpose? Yes. So you watched me. I watched you live, Daniel said. I watched you come home exhausted. I watched you ignore calls. I watched you pretend everything was fine. Ethan stopped pacing. You manipulated me. Daniel flinched. I never asked for $1. No, Ethan said bitterly. You just took it. Daniel's voice cracked. I took time. The words echoed. What happens now? Ethan asked quietly. Daniel picked up the photograph again. Now I leave. Why? Ethan asked. Why today? Daniel's eyes met his. Because 6 months was the longest I could stand to look at you and not say her name. Ethan felt something fracture inside his chest. You let me think I was helping a stranger, Ethan said. Daniel nodded. Because if I told you who I was, you might have stopped. And you wanted to punish me? Ethan asked. Daniel shook his head slowly. No, I wanted to understand you. Silence stretched. Ethan's voice dropped. Did you? Daniel stood, slinging the duffel bag over his shoulder. I understand that you still help people, even when it costs you, even when no one is watching. That doesn't erase the past, Ethan whispered. No, Daniel said, but it explains why Claire believed in you. Ethan's throat closed. I didn't come here for money, Daniel added. I came to see if kindness survives success. He walked toward the door, then paused. She forgave you, Daniel said softly. Even before she died. Ethan collapsed to his knees. Why didn't you tell me sooner? He asked, broken. Daniel's hand rested on the doorframe. Because some truths don't heal. They just demand to be carried. The door closed quietly behind him. Boxes scraped down the hallway. Footsteps faded. Ethan sat alone in the empty apartment, surrounded by echoes and the weight of 6 envelopes that now felt like confessions. He picked up the photograph again, and for the first time in years, he cried without restraint. Ethan didn't leave his apartment for 2 days. He barely slept, barely ate. Time lost its edges, dissolving into long stretches of silence, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing below his window. The photograph sat on the kitchen table. He hadn't put it away. Somehow, seeing it hurt less than pretending it didn't exist. Every time he closed his eyes, Daniel's words returned. I took time. You remember who you were allowed to remember. Kindness survives success. Ethan had built his adult life on a single comforting assumption, that he had moved on because he had to, that leaving the outreach center had been unfortunate but necessary, that people understood. That life simply carried on. Now he saw the truth more clearly and more cruelly. He hadn't just moved on. He had moved away from people, from responsibility, from consequences. On the 3rd morning, Ethan stood in the shower with the water running cold, letting it sting his skin as if punishment might restore balance. When he finally dressed, he didn't put on work clothes. He put on the jacket from the photograph. It still fit. That unsettled him more than anything else. The outreach center was still there, smaller than he remembered, the paint more chipped, the sign crooked, but unmistakably the same place. Ethan stood across the street for several minutes before crossing. Inside, the smell of old coffee and paper greeted him like an accusation. A woman behind the front desk looked up. Can I help you? I used to volunteer here, Ethan said, a long time ago. She studied him. Name? Ethan Moore. Ethan Moore. Her eyes flickered. Recognition. You're the one who left, she said, not unkindly. The words landed harder than expected. Yes, he replied. I am. She gestured toward a chair. What do you need? I'm looking for information about someone, Ethan said. Claire. The woman's expression softened. Claire Daniels. Ethan nodded. Her brother? Daniel. The woman exhaled slowly. He was here yesterday. Ethan's heart jumped. Yesterday? Yes. He asked about records, about donations, about you. End quote. Ethan swallowed. Did he say where he was going? She shook her head. No, but he didn't look like a man running away, more like a man closing a door. That image stayed with Ethan. Claire's file was thin, too thin. A few intake forms, notes scribbled by overworked staff. a referral to a clinic that never followed up. Ethan read every line as if it were scripture. She had waited, just like Daniel said, waited for appointments, for approvals, for someone to say yes instead of come back later. There was a note at the bottom, written in a different hand. Patient asked if volunteer Ethan M. had called. Ethan's chest constricted. He hadn't. Because he'd been busy. Because he'd been building something. Because he'd convinced himself he mattered more somewhere else. Ethan became obsessed. Not in the dramatic way movies portray no wild outbursts or confrontations, but in the quiet, dangerous way that turns guilt into purpose. He took time off work. He began pulling records, not just of Claire, but of dozens like her, people who had fallen through cracks so wide they might as well have been doors. He started asking questions no one liked, at hospitals, at nonprofits, at city offices. Some doors opened when they recognized his name. Others slammed shut harder. "You can't fix everything," one administrator told him. "Some people are beyond help." Ethan leaned forward. Or maybe some systems are. Weeks passed. Daniel didn't resurface. Ethan checked shelters, old addresses, the bus station downtown. Nothing. It would have been easier if Daniel had vanished completely. But one evening, a handwritten note appeared under Ethan's door. No envelope, just folded paper. "I heard you went back to the center. Don't do this out of guilt. That road never ends." Ethan sat on the floor, reading the note again and again. Then he stood. They met at the bus station at dusk. Daniel stood near a vending machine, duffel bag at his feet, looking thinner somehow, like each truth he'd spoken had cost him weight. "You shouldn't have come," Daniel said. Ethan nodded. "I know." They sat on a bench, side by side, watching people rush past with destinations that felt suddenly fragile. "I read her file," Ethan said. Daniel didn't respond. "She waited," Ethan continued. "Just like you said." Daniel's jaw tightened. "I want to help," Ethan said. Daniel laughed softly. "You already did. For 6 months. "That wasn't help," Ethan said. "That was comfort, and I used it to avoid the real problem." Daniel turned to him. "You can't save the past." "No," Ethan agreed. "But I can stop pretending it doesn't matter." Silence stretched. "You don't owe me anything," Daniel said finally. Ethan met his eyes. "I owe myself the truth." Ethan resigned from his job a week later. His boss stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "You're walking away from stability," she said. Ethan nodded. "I know. What are you going to do?" He thought of Claire, of Daniel, of 6 envelopes under a door. "I'm going to build something slower," he said. "Something that doesn't disappear when it's inconvenient." The first grant was small. Then another. Ethan used his experience, not just his money, to create a bridge between people waiting and systems that forgot them. Daniel watched from a distance. At first, suspiciously pedicle, guarded. "You don't trust me," Ethan said one evening. Daniel shook his head. "I don't trust redemption stories." "Fair," Ethan replied. They worked anyway, quietly. No headlines, no speeches, just presence. One afternoon, Daniel handed Ethan something unexpected. Another photograph, this one older. Claire stood between them, laughing. "I found this in storage," Daniel said. "She wanted you to have it someday." Ethan's vision blurred. "I don't deserve it," he whispered. Daniel shrugged. She didn't believe in deserving. She believed in trying again. Months later, on a cold morning, Ethan found an envelope under his own door, plain white. 3 words written on the front. Rent. This month. Inside was a single $1. And a note. "Just so you don't forget how it started." Ethan smiled through tears. The envelope stayed on Ethan's table for 3 days. Not because he didn't understand it. Because he did. $1. 3 words. A mirror held up to his face. Rent. This month. It wasn't a thank you. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a warning dressed as a memory. Don't turn this into a story where you win. Ethan stared at the note until the paper began to feel heavier than it should. The cruel thing about guilt was that it could imitate purpose. It could turn a good decision into a performance. It could convince you that pain was proof you were changing when pain was sometimes just pain. On the fourth morning, Ethan took the dollar and slipped it into his wallet beside the photo Daniel had given him, Claire in the middle, laughing like time wasn't a predator. Then he went to work. Not his old job, the new work, the slow work, the kind that didn't look impressive on social media, the kind that felt like carrying water in your hands, constant, spilling, necessary anyway. The program Ethan built started small, like most real things do. It wasn't flashy. No billboards, no celebrity endorsements, no marketing campaign with a slogan. Just a number people could call. A desk in the back of the outreach center. A small team trained to do one thing well. Follow-up. To call hospitals and ask, did they show up? To call clinics and ask, were they seen? To call landlords and ask, how long can you hold the eviction? To call a person and ask, are you okay today? It turned out the world didn't always need heroes. Sometimes it just needed witnesses. And that was harder, because witnesses didn't get applause. Daniel didn't join at first. He came by occasionally, quiet as a shadow, standing near the door with his duffel bag like he still didn't believe he was allowed to stay. Ethan never asked him to commit. He'd learned something important. Forcing closeness was just another kind of control. One evening, after everyone left, Daniel sat on the steps outside the center, elbows on his knees. Ethan sat beside him. They listened to traffic, to the city breathing, to the faint laugh of teenagers passing by. Finally, Daniel spoke. You know what I hated most? He asked. Ethan didn't answer. The waiting, Daniel continued, voice flat. Not just at the hospital. Waiting for my sister to get better. Waiting for someone to call. Waiting for help that never came. Waiting for a version of reality where it made sense. Ethan swallowed. I'm sorry. Daniel looked at him. Don't say that like it fixes anything. Ethan nodded. Okay. They sat in silence again. Then Daniel said, quieter, but I'll say this. You came back. Ethan's chest tightened. I don't know if it's enough, Ethan admitted. Daniel stared at the sidewalk. It's not. But it's something real. That was the first time Ethan realized Daniel wasn't looking for payment. He was looking for proof that the world could change shape, even a little. The following month, another envelope appeared under Ethan's door. This time, it wasn't white. It was brown paper, old and creased, as if it had been carried for years. No writing on the front. Ethan opened it carefully. Inside was a small stack of documents, held together by a rubber band, and a folded letter in Claire's handwriting. His hands began to shake before he even read it. The letter was dated 16 years ago. It smelled faintly of dust and something floral, like it had been stored in a drawer with old soap. Ethan unfolded it slowly. Ethan, if you're reading this, it means Daniel finally stopped being stubborn. I don't know what happened between us. I don't know why you stopped coming, but I'm not angry. I don't have space for that anymore. People think leaving is always cruel. Sometimes, leaving is just fear wearing a mask. I want you to know something that I never said out loud because it felt too heavy. You were the first person in a long time who made me believe my life mattered. If you become successful, don't let success turn you into someone who can't see people anymore. And if you ever help someone, please remember, help isn't a moment. It's what you do after the moment is over. Claire. Ethan's breath broke. The room blurred. He pressed the letter against his chest like it could stop time. The documents beneath it were medical forms. Denials. Delays. The kind of paperwork that looked harmless until you realized it was a death sentence in slow motion. At the bottom of the stack was a discharge summary marked deceased, stamped 2 days after the note in Claire's file that said she'd asked if Ethan called. Ethan sank to the floor, not crying quietly, crying like something was finally being pulled out of him that had been poisoning him for years. That night, Ethan drove to the bus station. He knew Daniel would be there. Daniel sat near the far corner, same duffel bag, same posture of someone ready to vanish at any moment. Ethan walked up and held the letter out. Daniel stared at it without taking it. She wrote that? Ethan asked, voice shaking. Daniel nodded. She wrote a lot when she couldn't sleep. Ethan swallowed. Why didn't you give it to me sooner? Daniel's jaw tightened. Because I hated you for being able to move on. Ethan nodded slowly, accepting it. Daniel finally took the letter. He read it again, though he clearly knew every word. His throat moved as he swallowed. I thought, Daniel said quietly, if I made you feel what we felt, it would balance something. Ethan's voice was raw. Did it? Daniel stared at the floor. No? Ethan sat beside him on the bench. 6 months, Ethan whispered. I thought I was doing something good. You were, Daniel admitted. And that's what made it worse. Ethan looked at him. Because kindness didn't undo what happened. Daniel nodded. They sat with the truth, like two men holding the same weight from opposite sides. After a long silence, Ethan spoke. I can't change that I left, he said. But I can change what leaving means going forward. Daniel didn't respond. Ethan continued, voice steadier. I don't want this to be a story where I pay my way out. I don't want you to feel like you have to forgive me to prove you're healed. Daniel's eyes flickered up. Then what do you want? Ethan looked at the crowds rushing by, people carrying their own invisible grief, like luggage. I want to keep showing up, Ethan said. Even when it doesn't feel heroic, even when it doesn't make me feel better, because she was right. Help isn't a moment. Daniel stared at him for a long time. Then he asked, almost like a child testing whether a promise could hold, and what if I don't forgive you? Ethan nodded, honest. Then I'll still show up. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Why? Ethan's voice broke again. Because I'm tired of living like the past only matters when it's convenient. For the first time, Daniel's face softened not into forgiveness, but into something close to peace. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled dollar bill. He placed it on Ethan's knee. Ethan looked at it, confused. Daniel said, Rent. This month. Ethan blinked. Daniel's mouth twitched into the smallest smile. Just to remind you, Daniel added, this isn't charity anymore. Ethan picked up the dollar, holding it like it was sacred. What is it then? He asked. Daniel stood, slinging the duffel over his shoulder. It's responsibility, he said. Then, after a pause, it's family too, if you don't ruin it. Ethan stood quickly. Where are you going? Daniel glanced toward the outreach center's direction. Tomorrow, he said simply. I'll come by. I'll help you train the new volunteers. Ethan's chest tightened, a different kind of ache, now something warm and painful. Okay, Ethan whispered. Daniel nodded and walked away, not disappearing, just leaving, like a man who intended to return. 6 months later, the building manager knocked on Ethan's door. You're not going to believe this, the manager said, holding a folder. Someone in 4B is behind on rent. Eviction notice goes out tomorrow. Ethan's stomach tightened automatically, old reflex. What's the name? Ethan asked. The manager flipped the page. A single mother, 2 kids. She's been trying to work it out. Ethan nodded slowly. Give me a day. He didn't go to the bank. He didn't slide an envelope under her door in secret. Instead, he walked to the outreach center, opened the program's database, and did what he had learned was harder than generosity. He started making calls. He followed up. He showed up. That night, when he returned home, he found an envelope under his own door, plain white. 3 words. Rent. This month. Inside was no money. Just a photo. Ethan and Daniel at the outreach center, standing beside a sign that read, Follow-up saves lives. On the back, Daniel had written, She would have liked this version of you. Ethan stared at the photo for a long time. Then he placed it on the table beside Claire's letter. And for the first time since moving day, the truth didn't destroy him. It remade him.